Hello, grade 11s. This is the screencast for the Russian Civil War and Bolshevik foreign policy. Let's get started. So the Russian Civil War, we're going to see two sides in it. We're going to see the whites, here represented by the white knight, banishing the red Bolshevik dragon, versus the new, more modern forces of the Bolsheviks. And you can see here that there that red wedge defeats the other whites. So again, much more modern and much more cutting edge in some ways. Now, let's move forward and take a look at what's going on in this Civil War. And here we can see the numbers. You can see there's a lot of different participants. Huge number of Bolsheviks and the Red Army. There's the White Movement, all different types of groups there. You'll even see there's a Green Army, which we'll talk about later. We've got different nationalities involved with the United Kingdom. Even Canada's in there. So it's a huge war in Russia and a huge international war. In terms of losses, we can see here losses in strengths. You can see the Russians are going to lose over 1.5 million, the whites over 1.5 million. The Allies are going to lose soldiers, not as many. And then you can also see the size of the mobilization here. We've got armies of 5 and 3 million people. And then the final number, this is also coming from Wikipedia, is we're looking at 7 to 12 million total casualties, including civilians and non-combatants. It's a horrible, horrible experience for people in Russia. It's both an ideological war, but it's also just a war for survival as a famine hits towards the end of the war. Now let's keep going and try and figure out who the different sides are. So, are these the reds or the whites that I'm describing characteristics? They are a group that has the support of international allies, the UK, Japan, France, the United States. Is that the red or the whites? Then they surround the enemy and they cut them off from international trade. Is that the reds or the whites again? And remember, the reds are Lenin. They have experienced officers. This group also has a coalition that includes Tsarists, Mensheviks, social revolutionaries, nationalists, liberals, and the military. And I think you've guessed it now that this is probably the whites. But let's take a look and compare it to this group over here. So this group, are they the reds or the whites? They have a strong ideology. They have supporters that include nationalists, workers, and peasants. They have strong and charismatic leaders, Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, and others. And I think you figured out now, this is the Reds. And they have war communism. And they have excellent discipline. And they have a centralized position, and they control their major railway networks and the production areas. So, in the Russian Civil War, we're going to see that the whites have the support of the international allies. They surround the enemy. And they've experienced officers, and they also have a coalition, which is both good and bad, all these different characteristics. So here we can see how these things match up. Sadly, that international support ends when World War II is over, when World War I rather is over. The problem that they're surrounding the enemy like this is that it's very hard for the northern forces and the forces on the two sides to cooperate, and with the southern forces coming up. So it's very hard for them to coordinate. In addition, they have experienced officers and soldiers, and even the Czech Legion for a while. So they really do have an advantage in that area early in the war. And then finally, that coalition is made up of, has different goals, and so it's very difficult to rally behind it. Some people, those Tsarists, even wanted to return to Tsarism and the loss of peasant lands. So it doesn't really help recruit peasants. Now, when we look at the whites, we'll do the same, the reds rather, we'll do the same thing. I'll pull this over here. And what we want to see here is that they've got that ideology, which is Bolshevism, to rally behind. They have a clear message. They have a way to deal with disloyalty. They've got a very broad base of support, some of it voluntary and other parts coerced. Remember, the Red Terror is going to be going on at this time. They have strong leaders to rally behind, and these strong leaders also inspire people. The war communism that they're going to use, that you've probably read about by now, is going to get them the necessary resources to fight this war. They've got excellent, excellent discipline through party ideology and also through fear and coercion. So the Treka will kill people that are disloyal. In addition, we've got a central position that means moving soldiers and materials is easier, as is coordinated attacks, and they also have access to more war materials because of that. So now we'll see how each one matches up. So, strong ideology. Supporters include nationalists, workers, and peasants, and nationalists because international groups are attacking their cause. They've got that strong charismatic leaders, in particular Lenin and Trotsky. They've got the war communism. So here we're summing up why the Reds are going to win. They've got excellent discipline. And finally, that centralized position. Now, what about the Greens? Those are the peasants who at one point are their own armies and just want to be left alone. By the end, they will either be crushed by the Reds or will have joined the Reds simply because the Tsarists and the other whites aren't always as helpful as they could be or as supportive as the Greens as they'd like. Here we can see the different fronts going on. So you can see the northern attacks that are going on here, the attacks from this side. Poland will even take an opportunity to attack. These lands are lost in the south as groups move north. Other groups will move in from this side. And this is also when the capital is moved from Petrograd, which they're worried about losing, is moved to Moscow in the center. But again, you can see the central position of the Reds, which really helps them fight the war. In addition, here is a more detailed view. You can see lands and territories they've lost, very fluid lines that are moving, but they still maintain that centralized area. We go forward. Here's a quote from Trotsky talking about some of the discipline. Trotsky's order to Red Army troops, issued 24th November 1918. Krasnov and foreign capitalists who support him have thrown onto the vortex from hundreds of agents who have penetrated Red Army units and are inciting men to desert. I declare that from now on an end must be put to this by merciless means. And this is Trotsky. Lenin supports him. 1. Every scoundrel who incites anyone to retreat or to desert or not carry out a military order will be shot. 2. Every soldier of the Red Army who voluntarily deserts his military post will be shot. Death to self-seekers and traitors. Death to deserters and the agents of Krasnov. Long live the honest soldiers of the Workers' Red Army. So this is the kind of discipline that's being enforced. Next, what we can see here is just a very simplified view, but you can see how there's four sets of forces coming at the Bolsheviks from all directions and how they're trying to resist. And what will happen is they'll be able to beat off, move their forces back and forth, and individually eliminate each of these threats. Now, here's their problem. They won the war, but Russia is crippled. Remember, we saw those millions who died at the start. War communism also alienated a lot of people in terms of the way it worked. And there is about to be a third Russian Revolution. And the Bolsheviks are about to be taken out. But we're dealing with Lenin here, and we're going to see he has a solution. Now, how does he know? How does Lenin know things are bad? In 1921, in Tambov and Kronstadt, there are problems. The Kronstadt Rebellion. Sailors at Kronstadt rebel against the Bolsheviks. This is a huge problem because it was the sailors who had been so supportive of the Bolsheviks movement. Now, a lot of them are dead from the Civil War, but still, these sailors were a bastion of support for the Bolsheviks. These sailors are unhappy with Lenin's authoritarian rule and the excesses of the Bolsheviks, the Red Terror in particular. So, their island fortress is stormed and the rebels eliminated. And one reason they stormed them quickly was the fact that the ice was soon going to disappear and the Red Army wouldn't be able to get the sailors. The other side of things, so not just military unhappy with the Bolshevik rule, but now we see that the Tambov Peasant Rising from 1920 to 1922. So it began while the Civil War was still on and exists a little bit past the Civil War. And here you can see the peasants are very unhappy with war communism and the grain requisitions, actually seizures by armed soldiers. And the large rebel forces, tens of thousands of people, are eventually quelled by both the Red Army and the Cheka, and it's merciless. On the other side, these Bolsheviks are about to lose the peace, so on the other side, rather than just crushing people mercilessly, they're going to offer a bit of a carrot and not just a stick. And that's where they're going to switch from war communism to the NEP. Now, war communism, we're going to have forced requisition of grains, sometimes even the seed grains, so then the peasants will die the next year because they won't have anything to grow. They're going to be forced to share under gunpoint with machine guns by the Cheka and the Red Army units. Under war communism, all production in factories is going to be centralized and for the war, because this is a life and death survival for the communists they see. And there's going to be even internal passports, and workers could be shot if they weren't working properly. And what's also going to happen under war communism is the peasants are just going to stop producing. So, It is useful because they find the food and materials they need for the war. As I highlighted before, the peasants stop producing as much food, and food production is going to be at 20% of pre-war levels. So the production in 1913 is, if it were 100, we are producing at 20% by 1921. The country is in crisis. And there is a huge amount of anger on the part of the workers. And if you remember in 1917, when the workers were angry, they revolted against their governments. Finally, all private trade and manufacture are forbidden. It's good communism, but people are not pleased. And finally, everything is made worse because of the poor weather and the policies, millions more are going to die due to famine. Now, under NEP, which Lenin has to work hard to persuade the Bolsheviks this is a good idea, the peasants can sell extra grain, and so they increase their output. Small businesses, if I remember correctly, but under 20 can open. Money is again used. So Bolsheviks had been very happy before because money had lost all value during the war. And we do have the scissors crisis, where we find that as food production increases, the amount of goods, food production is going to increase, and that's going to mean that food prices drop, and so there's going to be more and more food production, less and less prices being paid for the food, and the prices of the goods they can buy are going to increase as people have more food, more money from the food, and they're going to have a crisis in that. But they passed the scissors crisis. Now, Lenin's justification in NEP, there's a doc base that we've looked at in the past, but basically he says, we need to do this. We were a little too enthusiastic. We have to switch or we're going to be kicked out of government. And you've seen the reasons to change to NEP. The people are unhappy. The economy's not running. There's no production. No one's producing any food. And they have to win the people back by giving them a bit of capitalism. Now, to see about Lenin's resolve in all of this, here's a letter he wrote, which came from a secret archive, which was opened just over 10 years ago. And in it, we can ask the question, is he the father of state terrorism? And since we don't read Russian or his handwriting, here we go. I am extremely indignant that there's been absolutely nothing definite from you as to what serious measures have last been carried out for ruthless suppression of the kulaks of 5 volosks and confiscation of their grain. This is peasants who are opposing him. Your inactivity is criminal. All efforts should be concentrated on a single volost which shall be swept clean of all grain surpluses. Lenin, Chairman, People's Commissars. Lenin's so-called hanging letter was discussed during the controversy about the BBC documentary, Lenin's Secret Files, based upon Robert Service's finding in the Soviet archives. This is Service's English translation of the Russian original. Here we go. So here was the problem that Lenin presents above. Here is Lenin's solution. Comrades, the insurrection of 5 kulak districts should be pitilessly suppressed. The interests of the whole revolution require this, because the last decisive battle with the kulaks is now underway everywhere. An example must be demonstrated. 1. Hang, and make sure that the hanging takes place in full view of the people. No fewer than 100 known landlords, rich men, bloodsuckers. 2. Publish their names. 3. Seize all the grain from them. 4. Designate hostages in accordance with yesterday's telegram. Do it in such a fashion that for hundreds of kilometers around, the people might see, tremble, and know. Shout. They are strangling, and will strangle to death the blood-sucking kulaks. Yours, Lenin. P.S. Find some truly hard people to carry this out. So this shows you that Lenin both gave the stick to hit the peasants if they weren't doing what he wanted, but he also gave them a carrot with the NEP. Now, we're going to summarize with Russia under the Bolsheviks and Lenin. All right, Russia under the Bolsheviks and Lenin. So before looking at foreign policy and after digesting that horrible letter that Lenin wrote, the blank prison was the tallest building in Russia. It's a riddle. 2, the Red Terror and class enemies. There's a merciless mass terror against all opponents of the revolution. Because remember, he's fighting class enemies. The Cheka shot, how many from 1918 to 1922? There's Siberian prison camps, and we're going to increase from 50 to 70,000 prisoners from 1920 to 1923, and these are not nice camps to be in. This is not like the Tsarist exiles. They're going to be show trials, which are people are guilty already, and they're just going through the motions of putting them in jail. putting motions, putting them on trial, and then put them in jail, shoot them, and then if the Czech involved, maybe shoot them and their families. There's going to be the Union of the Militant Something created. We're also going to see central control by the Central Committee. There's a ban on factions because this party is under assault, as you would have seen in the play posit if you just chose to look at that one. And they cannot have factions. They cannot have another revolution occur. And then finally, those nations like Georgia and Finland and Latvia, what happens to some of them? So you've had a chance to look at these things. Let's go find out. Lubyanka prison was the tallest building in Russia because from the basement of it where you're being tortured, you can see Siberia, those Siberian prison camps that are down here. The Cheka shot people, tens of thousands of people killed. Remember, this is Lenin. He's got a merciless mass terror against all opponents of the revolution. And why? Because he is fighting a class war, and he needs to, just like when you fight a virus, your white blood cells need to be merciless taking it out. He is going to take out the virus and save the Russian society. There's going to be the Union of Militant Godless, which will start getting rid of the church and going after priests. Finally, there's going to be nations like Georgia and the Ukraine, which will be forcibly brought back into the country to form the USSR. Now, the Bolsheviks in the world. There's Lenin, and now you can start to see people's view. They were a merciless, nasty bunch. Now, mind you, the whites still had the white terror. So in Russia, no one's hands are clean during this civil war in this period. But Lenin and the Bolsheviks are going to seek peaceful coexistence. Lenin and others hope for a world revolution. And in part, that's one reason he was waiting before he signed the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, was because he was hoping for revolution to break out in Poland and in Germany, and for those workers to join his revolution. And then finally, Lenin establishes the Comintern to support communist revolutions around the world, which is going to make it a little bit hard to have point number one, which is that peaceful coexistence. Now, here's from Lenin's speech, the 7th Bolshevik Party Congress of 6th of March 1918, urging acceptance of the peace treaty with Germany, signed 3rd of March. And it's that idea that I said, that he's hoping there's going to be a revolution, so he's not going to have to honor the agreement of that terrible, terrible treaty he signed. It will be a good thing if the German proletariat rises up in revolution. But have you discovered such an instrument, one that will determine that the German Revolution will break out such and such a day? No. That you do not know, and neither do we. We are staking everything on this card. If the revolution breaks out, everything is saved, of course. But if it does not, the masses will say to you, you acted like gamblers. And Lenin, if nothing, is a gambler. There will be a revolution, by the way, in Germany, the Spartacist uprising, but it fails. Then he continues here in his speech to the Bolshevik Party, Congress rather. A period has set in of severe defeats inflicted by imperialism, armed to the teeth, upon a country which has demobilized its army, which had to demobilize. What I foretold has come to pass. Instead of the first Brest-Litovsk peace, we have received a much more humiliating peace, and the blame for this rests upon those who refuse to accept the former peace. So here we are, Lenin spreading the blame of what's happened, but also hoping there'll be a revolution that will free him from the terms. Finally, we can see that Lenin is going to start to trade with other countries. They need to do that. And gradually they're going to gain diplomatic recognition from other countries. Commercial links will follow with countries like the UK. There'll be a secret treaty signed with Germany. And they did go to war with Poland to recover lands, while they did let Finland and the Baltic states leave. That ends our lectures on Lenin, and it actually ends the year's lectures. Thank you.